Welcome back to the Buck Sexton Show. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton. And the big news yesterday, beyond the impeachment charade, which we've already talked about, is that the Trump administration signed a monumental phase one trade deal with China. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the hour with one of those who was most influential in pushing this administration and representing this administration's tough line on the Chinese Communist Party regime, a tougher line than has ever been pushed since we formally opened relations with China, really beginning with Nixon back in 72, which has been, in my view, the most fundamental, most important, long-term, critical, and monumental change in U.S. national security and foreign policy to recognize the nature of the China competition, the China threat, China's adversarial nature, and actually begin to turn the ship of state around because we haven't aided, abetted, enabled, emboldened this malevolent Chinese Communist Party for decades. To put that deal in context, I think we need to talk a little bit about what is the nature of the Chinese Communist Party regime. Because the nature of the regime at the end of the day is what matters even more sometimes than what the words are on a piece of paper. And you could say the same thing, for example, with the quote-unquote Iran nuclear deal, which we discussed in part already. You can't have a deal with the mullahs that they will abide by in any sense unless they really feel that their livelihood is at stake and the alternative is utter destruction. I'm not saying it's analogous with China, but what I am saying is that the regime matters above all else, whatever contingencies are, whatever's been put in writing on paper. Honoring a deal requires two honorable parties to it. And so you have to understand this deal in context of that nature of an expansionist, imperialist, frankly, often malign, deceptive regime that is the Chinese Communist Party regime. And so let's talk a little bit about what their true core aims are. Their true core aims are expand their totalitarian rule so that, first of all, the Chinese Communist Party can survive in perpetuity. And second, that it can put forth its prerogatives and impose them upon their own people, those in their near abroad, quote unquote, and that includes Taiwan, that includes Hong Kong, that includes others as well. And ultimately expand their power so that they're not just the regional hegemon, but the global hegemon. And what would that mean? Mean that China is not only rich, strong, and powerful, but that every other nation effectively bends to China's rule. And the Trump administration has spoken quite openly and honestly about the nature of this regime. The human rights violations that this regime has engaged in are impactful not because human rights are necessarily the number one American interest when it comes to foreign powers and how we best deal with them. We have to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. But because it tells you something about the way the Chinese Communist Party rules its own people and how it will ultimately treat others as its power expands. And its ability to project that power expands globally through things like One Belt, One Road and other initiatives that we've spoken about in prior episodes. There are stories of mass forced organ harvesting from prisoners. There's a one-child policy, which if you don't know about, I've written a review of an amazing, harrowing documentary on China's one-child policy that, to Amazon's credit, I believe is being distributed through Amazon, which talks about the forced abortions, effectively the Chinese Communist Party ripping children away from their parents and leaving them to die on the roadsides. Unthinkable horrors. That's the Chinese Communist Party. Turning the guns on the protesters in Hong Kong and trying to force extradition so that China can effectively take prisoner those who are supposed to be able to live in the relatively free, although increasingly shrinking, relatively free Hong Kong that China is supposed to respect. Taiwan. China has threatened invasion of Taiwan. That's why we supply Taiwan with sophisticated weaponry to deter China from seeking to, quote-unquote, reunify a part of China that's not theirs. Threatening foreign ambassadors and other officials. Threatening dissidents in the Chinese diaspora around the world that they will potentially injure, imprison, otherwise punish their families that are back on the mainland should you speak out against the Chinese Communist Party abroad. That's the nature of the regime that we're dealing with. Two other recent stories caught my eye that really get to the core of what the Chinese Communist Party is about. Here's one headline, I believe from LifeSite News. Chinese government demands Christians use religion to, quote, spread Communist Party principles. Everything serves the party, including religion. And by the way, religion, of course, during the Cold War was considered by many to be the antidote to the Soviet Union and its expansionist ideology. So, of course, any competing worldview is going to be something that, if you're the Chinese authorities, you have to clamp down on, because you cannot tolerate any sort of dissent, any sort of cracks in the veneer that they've built. And by some measures, Christianity is the fastest growing religion in China, with millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of members, and that's not even necessarily including those who practice underground. So this is significant. And the article says, new draconian rules for religious groups are set to go into place in China, requiring that they spread Communist Party principles. China's totalitarian government promulgated new rules on December 30 that will place virtually all aspects of religious life under the control of the Communist Party. The administrative measures consist of 6 chapters and 41 articles governing the, quote, organization, function, supervision, and management of religious groups, which would include religious doctrine, annual and daily activities, and rallies. The new rules go into force on February 1 and come as part of a growing crackdown by Chinese communists on religion. And many religious minorities have been persecuted. We didn't talk about the biggest human rights violation of all, which is the actual gulag, 21st century gulags that have been constructed in the Xinjiang province, where millions in total of Uyghur Muslim ethnic minorities reside, of which at least 1 million, and probably more, I would guess, are held in effectively modern-day gulags because of their faith, under the guise of potentially posing a threat, a national security threat. But in reality, because they pose a threat because they might believe something that conflicts with Chinese Communist Party principles. But religion has to be bent to support the party because the party resides above all else. And if not, it has to be crushed with an iron fist. And when you infringe upon someone's faith and their conscience, that tells you a heck of a lot about the nature of the authorities that you're dealing with. Now, in some ways, I would argue it shows fragility. If you can't tolerate competing or dissenting views, then how strong can you really be? On the other hand, the fact that they can do this and then put on top of it a massive police state apparatus in their social credit scores, where they govern how good of a citizen you are based upon how closely you hew to Communist Party principles. It's scary that any government could have that power, and that they're exporting that technology to many of the other malevolent regimes that they do business with around the world should scare us. And then, of course, that they're the ones that are the leaders in 5G technology, which is going to be the network that serves as the backbone of basically all information transfer and communications throughout the world, including among our allies. Can you trust a regime that has a social credit score for its citizens, watches their every move, and grades them based upon how well they're checking the party boxes? You want to put them in charge of all global telecommunications and information transfer? This is the Chinese regime. And then a much smaller example, but that I think gets also to the nature of not just this Communist Party, but the way that Communist parties have been really forever. This is from Ryan Saavedra in the Daily Wire. Headline, Communist China, private ownership of guns in U.S. serious problem, must change. Saavedra says, Communist China, which currently has millions of people locked away in concentration camps, said in state-controlled media this week the Second Amendment is a quote-unquote serious problem, and that there needs to be quote-unquote change in how the American public views private ownership of guns. The Global Times, which is Chinese state-run media, published the op-ed after a good guy with a gun in Texas stopped a shooting in a church. China mocked the United States, saying that, quote, shootings are shocking in a U.S. allegedly governed by law. And he quotes a little bit from the article, and it's worth quoting in part also just to look at the parallels between their propaganda media and our propaganda media. The article says private gun ownership is a tradition from the early days of the founding of the U.S. In a modern society, the problems created by this tradition have already exceeded the benefits. It's problematic. American society has already seen serious problems caused by the private ownership of guns, but their massive number has contributed to an enormous inertia. Many interest groups have benefited from it, and some ordinary people have truly gained a sense of safety. To change this habit, which has lasted hundreds of years, tremendous political courage and a rearrangement of interests is required. Mike Bloomberg agrees. Facts have proved that the U.S. system is unable to handle the intricacies of countless issues around guns, including politics, economics, law and order, and public psychology. The country can neither manage the safe storage and use of so many guns owned by ordinary people, nor can it establish a new national system that bans or strictly restricts guns. It cannot even form an overwhelming opinion regarding gun issues. And then Saavedra, to his credit, writes here, China's attack on the Second Amendment comes after Hong Kong protesters have requested to have their own Second Amendment rights, gee, I wonder why, so they can defend themselves from the oppressive communist Chinese government. And this is also after the Wall Street Journal reported that following in the footsteps of Mao Zedong, during a 2-day meeting that ended last month by Mr. Xi, the party's 25-member Politburo hailed his policies as visionary and described him as the Renmin Lingshu, or People's Leader, a designation that directly echoes an accolade most closely associated with Communist China's founder, Mao Zedong. And of course, like Mao Zedong, effectively Xi has absolute power. He is chairman of the party for life. First, there's the use of the propaganda, and the Chinese Communist Party always says, we want to treat every nation with mutual respect and admiration, respect for sovereignty. We don't meddle in others' foreign affairs. Okay, well, who are you to be commenting on our Second Amendment? In your propaganda rag that's in English so the entire world can read it and it's a propaganda coup for you. More importantly is the fundamental issue of what are Second Amendment rights at core actually about? At core, the entire tradition in Western civilization, and in particular in the Anglosphere, is about the right to self-defense, self-preservation, an essential right. And that's self-preservation both in nature and it's self-preservation in your political sphere. China, of course, what they don't tell you, has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the entire world. It's almost impossible to own firearms there as an individual. Why is that the case? Because the regime can't tolerate it. Just like they can't tolerate our First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom to debate and argue in an actual open marketplace of ideas. They can't tolerate you being able to defend yourself against any tyranny, again, whether in nature or the tyranny of an oppressive government. China doesn't want its people to have the right to defend their lives and their liberties because they don't believe that life and liberty trump their tyrannical, iron communist party fist. This article is important, this propaganda is important because it gets to the core, which is that China doesn't believe in any rights as we understand them in the West. Not for its people and not for those that it interacts with either. And that's why in the past, the Chinese Communist Party has lied, cheated, and stolen. The question will be with this Phase 1 trade deal, and we're going to ask one of the leaders of the Trump administration in taking a tough line against the Chinese shortly, Peter Navarro, why is this time different? This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton on the Buck Sexton Show. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Buck Sexton Show. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton, and we've been talking about the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, which controls all of China, its businesses, its people, their right to bear arms or not, as the case may be, their lack of any sorts of the civil liberties that we enjoy in America. And what I've argued is that you have to keep this context in mind when it comes to all of the United States' official dealings with Chinese Communist Party officials and even with any of their private, quote-unquote, private sector actors, because in reality there is no distinction between private and public there. And so we need to be very clear-eyed about the nature of it. And that is essential context in terms of having a healthy bit of caution and skepticism when it comes to anything with China. And I believe the administration completely gets this, not only because of the way that the administration has described the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and its aims in the past, but by dint of its entire policy towards the Chinese Communist Party, speaking openly and honestly about the way that they've abused and ripped off America. In fact, even President Trump, during the signing ceremony yesterday, alluded to some of those issues. He basically said, cover your ears, Chinese representatives, while I talk about the truth here. Tariffs still remain on China. And it's an important point, by the way, to note. You know, the entire world told us, and look, I'm a devotee of free enterprise economics, a longtime defender of capitalism. Tariffs run in the face of capitalism to the extent that you have parties that are all really trading on an open and honest playing field, you know, where there's comparative advantage and you're good at this, producing this, you're good at producing this. We trade, everyone ends up better off. Let's not basically put a tax on products and then get into a war over it. And then you're taxing this, you're taxing televisions and I'm taxing soybeans. The difference is that we have not been operating on anything remotely close to a level playing field. And in fact, we have built the entire world trade, financial architecture, global enterprise writ large is attributable to American institutions and largely American companies, American technologies, American-led policies. We invited China to operate in that system under the naive view, the disastrous view that economic liberalization would ultimately lead to political liberalization. Or maybe for the more cynical people, because they felt that China's a really big marketplace and we better take advantage of it while the getting's good, or someone else will. Consequences potentially to U.S. national interest be damned. And maybe they didn't even conceive of the idea that China could end up as strong and as powerful and bellicose increasingly as it has become. Tariffs, though, they told us, you can't impose tariffs. We can't win a trade war. And the Trump administration said, well, actually, we can win trade wars. It's going to be easy. And the fact of the matter is they have been right pretty much every single time in terms of using tariffs as a tool for leverage, not for tariffs in and of themselves, not because the administration loves the idea of the protectionism, but because the administration understands it is a blunt tool that we, with the biggest economy in the world, by a large measure of magnitude, can withstand, and which will bring parties to the table so that they will no longer rip us off and have unfair trade and unfree trade and take advantage of us because we let the world take advantage of us in every single possible realm. And China, of course, is the biggest actor of all in the way of those who have taken advantage of us. As I said before, lying, cheating, stealing their way after being given entree into this amazing global economy that America is the backbone of. They steal hundreds of billions of dollars in intellectual property from us. They counterfeit goods. They've flooded our soil with fentanyl in places that have been hollowed out and destroyed in no small part because of the offshoring of jobs to China, because China is able to compete by paying people nothing. Not only that, forced technology transfer. You can't do business in China unless China basically gets the rights to all of the crown jewels of your company. It's unfair. It's gone on for so long, and it has enabled China to become a serious competitor to America, and again, one that, based on its nature, threatens our liberty. Welcome back to the Buck Sexton Show. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton, and we talked a little bit about the Democratic Party's ends justify the means sort of perspective, and that has a way of permeating not just our political system, but also our culture, our society, our economic institutions, really every facet of our lives, because leftism demands control over every part of our lives, sort of like with the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. It's a similar sort of all-encompassing, totalitarian in the sense of controlling everything ethos. And the scary thing is when you see it seep into your culture such that ultimately we have a society that's completely divided in almost every single facet. And when you really think about it in America today, I mean, what does unite people who live on the coast and people who live everywhere else? When I walk around the streets in New York, ideologically, I'm completely different from everyone around me, 99.999% of the time. We disagree on a whole host of subjects. Really, I've thought about this. Maybe the only uniting institution in America today, beyond the fact that the military is still overwhelmingly loved and revered and respected, yeah, the only institution certainly related to the government that's respected at this point, is sports. I mean, can you think of something else that unites people from all walks of life, from every corner of the country, whether it's the smallest agrarian town or the biggest urban center? That's pretty much it. It's sports. Can a country really survive long term when it is so torn? And I don't want to sort of exaggerate the divide in America because look, we fought a civil war in the 60s. Tensions were as high as they've been at probably at any time since the Civil War. There have been all sorts of periods of strife, of partisanship, of animus and tension within our culture, within our society, and we've been divided and at each other's throats from the beginning. I mean, when people talk about the viciousness of the press today, and the press is vicious, and the press does lie and cheat, and effectively, as I usually argue, serves as the communications arm of the Democratic Party in many respects. But the press, it used to be that you had party newspapers. The newspapers were known as party-associated publications. I mean, in some ways it was better then because it was more transparent. But they would allege all sorts of asinine things within those publications. We were remarkably torn as a country. But again, the difference is that at core, there were certain things that did unite us, whether it was our understanding of the founding, our understanding of our history, our understanding of our heritage, our understanding of the fundamental rights and responsibilities that we were built on. Even just simple common virtue, views on morality, the importance of tradition, to having a functional society where we could disagree vigorously on any number of political issues, but separate the political issues from the things that at core united us. The left can't tolerate that. We as conservatives, we debate them on any number of issues, and I would argue that the average conservative knows a lot more about the left's positions than the left knows about our positions because they believe that their positions have to predominate by hook or by crook. Again, though, what gets more insidious is when you have every element of your society invaded by politics. And for the latest example of this, there was a story out this week that was big in kind of the financial world, dominated in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. BlackRock, which is the largest investment management company in the world in terms of the amount of money that it manages, about $7 trillion in assets that it helps invest on people's behalf or that people invest through BlackRock. They laid out a whole slew of initiatives under what's called ESG. Now, what is ESG? Environmental, social, and governance focused initiatives. That's become a huge thing in the financial world. If you want to invest in basically green friendly companies, if you want to invest in companies that value quote unquote diversity, not, in terms of the way of thought, but in terms of skin pigmentation, if you want to support companies that are truly progressive, social justice warriors, ESG are usually the kinds of vehicles. You can invest in some sort of fund that has a portfolio of companies that are all social justice warrior companies. And that has become a massive industry in financial services. BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the world, is one of the leaders in ESG. And this week, they laid out a slew of initiatives on stated environmentalist grounds, so under sustainability and environmentalism in ESG. Slew of initiatives where not only will they be following these initiatives and basically imposing their progressive views on, all of their employees, but also on all of the companies and other assets that they invest in. So in other words, they will push, if through BlackRock, their investors own X percent of a company. Let's say that company is an energy company, and that company isn't a clean energy company. They'll push the board to get more clean. And they can do that because they effectively control the money. Follow the money in that company. So let's look at what some of these initiatives are. Their CEO wrote to other CEOs, "We don't yet know which predictions about the climate will be most accurate, nor what effects we have failed to consider. but there's no denying the direction we are heading. Every government, company, and shareholder must confront climate change, unquote. So the controller of more assets under management than any investment manager in the world is saying climate change. It's fact. World's going to end in, I guess, 11 years probably. They used to say 12, but we're a year in the future now. Investing decisions should be made on that basis. Basically, our entire society should be organized around that. And that's not a government talking. This is the private sector talking. A private sector company that effectively, through all of the different assets that you can invest in, the stocks, bonds, and everything else that one, either an individual or a big pension fund or an endowment, college endowment, or your company can invest in through BlackRock. You can invest in everything through BlackRock. Basically, the entire global market you can invest in through them. So when BlackRock says, basically, toe the party line and we're going to nudge the companies that do any business with us, which is basically every company, towards towing their environmentalist line, that's sort of a scary state of play. He goes on in another letter to BlackRock clients to say, we believe that sustainability should be our new standard for investing. Okay, well, look. As a private sector company, they are more than welcome to do whatever they want. I mean, one of the proposals is they're going to get out of investing in any businesses that generate meaningful amounts of revenue from thermal coal production. They're going to kick it out of the portfolios that they offer to people. They're going to push clients to adhere to the company's priorities, such as UN Sustainable Development Goals, such as gender equality and affordable and clean energy. They're going to substantially increase the number of social justice-friendly investment offerings. Look, they're welcome to do this stuff. And they've also, by the way, joined the Climate Action 100 Plus, which engages with companies to improve climate disclosure and align business strategy with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Is that what you think private sector companies should be in the business of? Look, again, I don't begrudge them. They can put forth whatever view they want, and in a free marketplace, thank God, you can move elsewhere. If you don't like what the CEOs stand for, if you don't like their company policies, take your money elsewhere, protest them, boycott them if you want. That's fine. But recognize how much of the marketplace this actually impacts. Because if we're talking about $7 trillion worth of wealth invested across a whole slew of different companies, you can damn well be sure this is going to impact any number of companies. And if you don't toe the party line, your stock is going to crater. That's meaningful. So we see this on a micro level, this sort of control with the cancel culture, where if you don't toe the progressive line, you're thrown out. Your ability to live, work, function in society is basically over. We've seen, for example, that payment processing companies like PayPal and the like will kick people off of their services who are funded by people like you and me to be able to produce content that a major corporation won't allow them to produce, again, because it flouts PC norms. Kicked off. Can't make a living. Can't use the payment processing company. This is far bigger. I mean, this is, again, $7 trillion almost in assets under management. Toe the party line. This should really scare us, in my opinion. It's not just about this particular move, and it's not just about the fact that, look, live and let live. If they want to be woke capital, they can be woke capital, okay? They can deal with the consequences of that. But there are a couple broader points to be made. One is the fact that this is representative of where corporate America is, where they have basically entire sections that are dedicated to making sure that you don't run afoul of political correctness and you don't run afoul of the progressive sort of ethos that dominates in all of our elite institutions, in our colleges, in our media, in every facet of society that is responsible for imparting views to people and telling people how they should think. So it should scare us from the perspective of this is but one massive, granted, company. But what do you think the management teams look like at pretty much all of the major corporations? And do you think they care more about the people that they have their cocktail parties with, who run the schools that they send their kids to, their attorneys, all the senior management at these companies? Do you think that they care more about you, the deplorable Or do you think they care more about the people that they're friends with and they think everyone else thinks like? Because they think that their views, which are held by really like 10 or 20% of the country, are actually the mainstream views. And the real mainstream views in the country that the forgotten man in this country holds, traditions they hold dear, are fringe. I want to talk a little bit more about woke capital, and we'll do so right after this short break. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton. Back right after this. Welcome back to the Buck Sexton Show. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about woke capital. And this is truly woke capital because investment managers are a key part of sort of the capital markets and the financial industry, and basically where funds get directed in our economy that tells us what companies grow and succeed and which companies fail. And I was talking about the significance of this particular company, BlackRock, as the biggest asset manager in the world. And they're also one of 181 maybe plus employers who signed on to an agreement which basically said that companies no longer, their primary focus is no longer creating value for their owners, their shareholders, but to serving all stakeholders. They signed on to this agreement, changing what the principles of business are. The business should be about protecting the environment by embracing sustainable practices across our businesses. That is, BlackRock and basically all of the biggest companies in a bunch of different sectors agreed it's not about making money for your owners anymore and serving your owners. It's in part about serving environmental causes. But there's a hypocrisy in this, and it actually links back to what we've been discussing and will continue to be discussing over the next couple of days, actually, China and U.S.-China policy. Here's the hook. Okay, to the extent that BlackRock and these other companies are sustainability driven and they're true believers in their principles, how do they square that with the exposure that they and many of these other companies have to the world's biggest polluter in China? Well, let me explain this a little more. BlackRock, for example, has expanded its offerings of China-specific investment vehicles. So you, or again, a big pension fund or an endowment, can invest more and more money in big Chinese companies, probably companies that are polluters. Or if not, at least, they're companies that prop up a Chinese Communist Party regime that allows companies to pollute and destroy the environment there. But you haven't really heard of any of these big companies saying, we will no longer do business with China and the Chinese market due to their lack of sustainable practices in their businesses. As I said, investors basically not only underwrite some percentage of the companies that pollute, they effectively prop up this regime that enables that pollution. So can you really call yourself a proponent of environmental justice, claiming you care about sustainability, if with one hand you say we're going to punish basically non-Chinese companies that don't hew to our environmental principles, but we're going to actually increase our investment holdings and offerings in Chinese companies? And it's not just the environmental hypocrisy here. It's also investing in other non-social justice warrior-friendly firms, like, for example, Hikvision. Hikvision is a China-based in Hangzhou business that produces the cameras that surveil the minority Uyghur Muslim population that is being held in modern-day gulags in China's Xinjiang province. Where's woke capital on that? You know, we saw this with Nike, where, God forbid, a senior executive for the Houston Rockets basketball team comes out and says something pro-Hong Kong, and the backlash is swift because Nike has all their profits tied to doing business with China. They get awfully quiet when it might impact their bottom line with their social justice warriordom. I want to see all the financial services companies come out and say we're not going to do business with China because they flout progressive norms, values, and principles. But you won't see it. And why won't you see it? Because at the end of the day, it is profits that matter. It's profits that matter. And oh, by the way, it goes beyond that because these ESG products, these sustainability products that they offer, and this push for green companies, I'll bet you find in a lot of ways it's a racket because of those companies that fit this ESG, environmentalism, sustainable, social governance, and the like. What percentage of those companies receive crony capitalist benefits? It's not even woke capital. It's more like woke crony capital. How many of them receive huge subsidies from the government to basically keep afloat companies that otherwise wouldn't be able to exist in the free marketplace because they can't compete with the traditional industries that we've had in this country? What percentage of them get tax breaks and write-offs? What percentage of them have their business almost completely tied to government support in one way or another? And then, oh, by the way, factor in that some of these pensions and other government associated investors, including governments themselves and sovereign wealth funds, invest through places like BlackRock. They're sort of playing both sides because, on the one hand, the government supports all these policies. And then, on the other hand, the government is investing those pension funds in the very companies that benefit from those government policies. So we should call a spade when it comes to woke capital, whether it's a big asset manager or Nike or anyone else. Really, at the end of the day, it's about profits. Let's not call it woke capital. Let's call it woke crony capital. This is Ben Weingarten in for Buck Sexton on the Buck Sexton Show. We'll be right back.